Mach 3, give me crew show on 2, 3, and 4.
Line 1, exit 1.
6, 3. Mach 3, give me start line 2.
5 electric. Mach 3. Line 2, Mach 9.
Mach 3, give me start line 1 and crew show on 7 and 9.
Line 1, crew show 79, Mach 9.
Yeah, do something. I hate weapons.
Super up, line 3, red ball, avionics.
Super Ops. Line 4 is code 3 for engine vibe.
Hey, so I started a Patreon because frankly, this stuff's getting expensive. Nothing will change the podcast or the blog if you don't subscribe, but if you want early access to episodes, monthly AMAs, episode shoutouts, voting on podcast topics, and all kinds of 20 Years Done gear, head over to patreon.com/20yearsdone. This month's top tier Patreon shoutout goes to Robbie Walker, Travis Barnes, Kevin Traw, and JT Owens. Thanks for the support. Okay, so today we're joined by Lieutenant Colonel retired Kevin Traw, my squadron commander from 2006 and frequent podcast guest. Thanks for coming on, Kevin. And once again, also thanks for supporting on Patreon. So when you're listening to your own episodes that you pay for, it all basically you've built a custom podcast for subjects that you're interested in. You get to listen to all the time. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I get paid. I pay someone to do it, so I don't know what that says about me.
I guess you're still a commander. Is what your podcast commander is what's going on here.
Podcast commander. Do I get commander pay for that?
Yeah, you delegated it. You're like, I want to hear interesting things about aircraft maintenance and leadership. Chris, do a podcast for me. Yes, sir.
Should have thought about that.
Yes, sir. Man, $40. You're paying me not a whole lot.
That's right. That's about what an airman gets paid, right?
Yeah, it's still that officer enlisted class system. Okay.
Oh boy.
So this is a subject you've been wanting to talk about a while, and I'm glad we finally got to it. Talking about the veteran transition and your experience probably transitioning yourself, my experience transitioning, but also your experience as somebody that's now been working in the civilian sector since 2014. I think you're pretty much in the same job or same company for when you retired, right?
I started 5 days before my terminal leave ended. So I've been at the same company the entire, just a little over 7 years now.
That's awesome. Okay. Which, if you've ever listened to anything that Mike McDowell, who was my guest on previous episodes, talk about, it's actually fairly rare. Well, maybe not rare, but there's a large percentage of veterans that don't stay in their first job. I'm one of those statistics as well. I didn't stay in my first job after retirement, but you have. And what's interesting about that is you initially, I guess let's talk about, just do a quick, what was the gist of your military career, just the high points and positions, and then talk about your positions after retirement so we can see how that progressed.
Yeah, so I was a core aircraft maintenance and munitions, which switched to maintenance munitions separate. But when I started, I was that way. Spent most of my field time in flight line maintenance, the vast majority. The last time I worked back shop was when I was a brand new first lieutenant. Just from there on, stayed out in the flight line. Did a number of staff jobs. I was in Europe twice, once for NATO, once for U.S. Air Force in Europe, and then one time in the Pentagon. And then I did a career broadening tour right in the middle of my career where I actually applied to go to systems acquisition. They switch 10 maintenance with 10 acquisition. And you go, and I asked to go to a space, not like, say, go to one of the ALCs or go to the weapons center out in Eglin. So I ended up at LA Air Force Base. And if I was going to do something different, I wanted to not rely on my aircraft maintenance knowledge. I said, well, if I go to space, I can't rely on that. So it'll force me to learn. The other thing I want to point out is that, and this will be important to where I'm at now, is I was always interested in process improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was in Europe on the command there, I went through with General Electric, I went through Six Sigma, Green Belt and Black Belt training. That was very much early. I think we were the first group in the Air Force to go through that. I wrote my master's thesis actually on process improvement, where before I went through the Six Sigma training. So it was very interesting. I was in the sortie support flight commander.
Right.
So I had phase in the tool shed. And so I was working on my MBA. And so I said, I want to do my master's thesis on applying process improvement principles to a phase, right? So I had been in the squadron for a while, and they knew I was working on MBA. And, everyone, most of the time, once you torment the lieutenants, you work with them, right? And, the phase was a little tighter of a group. So I said, I need you guys to do these things. We need to track everything. And I made them wear certain aprons and spent months of that doing. It was really good. They really went. I think mostly they were having fun with me. And we came up with stuff like we would put the aircraft in the air on gear. We put it on tripods at the beginning, which actually they had a C-130 accident at Little Rock. So we stopped doing that like 6 months later. It was really smart. We came up with like pulling the motor out no matter what, because what we found is 9 out of 10 phases we'd
you pulled the motor anyway.
Right. So we pulled in ways. They're like, well, Lieutenant, that's a waste, 1 out of 10. I said, but when you pull it up front,
you know it.
Yep. It's not going to delay the phase. And I said, plus there's also a chance if you can find something in the bay or whatever, there's maybe some added benefits, but 9 out of 10 times you're going to pull it anyway.
I'm kind of surprised your group commander signed off on you pulling a motor every time, because the risk is you find like something bad in there, right? Well,
I remember this was the objective wing. So there was no one, and we didn't even have a dog'em. So we were our own little fiefdoms. So, but again, I think I would have, well, they may not have listened to me, but I put the data together, right? So, and it made sense. And so, but again, so basically did standard aircraft maintenance, was a squadron commander, ops officer, and then the staff tour. So that's my 20 years in a nutshell.
Okay. And so you retired in 2014, and you said you got a job 5 days from your official retirement days when you started?
I started on the 27th of January, and my retirement was 1 February.
And because I already know the answer, is this new job in aircraft maintenance?
It's not. It's actually in healthcare. So one of the first things I think you have to kind of decide to do is, I tell people you have to know what you don't want to do and what you do want to do. So there's the things I didn't want to do is I didn't want to commute. I'm in Southern California. I didn't want to commute. I didn't want to work in defense. I didn't want to work in the government. I could have stayed in another 10 years in the Air Force. I said, so if I want to stay in defense or government, I could just stay in the Air Force. So then I said, what do I want to do? I said, well, I would like to work in non-defense aviation, aircraft maintenance. It makes sense. I want to work in like manufacturing. I think because I came from maintenance, I do enjoy, it's called making things, right? And I didn't really, if that thing could have been screwdrivers, vacuums, it could have been, stabs for crew chiefs to take off, right? It could have been, well, that would have been defense, and that would have been out. For, for civilian airlines, I would have been fine with that. And healthcare. So those were kind of my three, industries: non-defense aviation, manufacturing, and healthcare. So those are the areas that I kind of focused on. And then I ended up in healthcare.
So I guess walk me through when did you start actively trying to network and get jobs in any of those industries? How did you narrow down positions? I guess how many jobs did you apply for? Like, what was that? What did your transition look like?
Yeah. So I started TAP about 2 years out, right? I'll start that. And, my big concern with TAP is they spend about 2 days on resume writing and 2 days on networking. And it's 2 hours on networking. It should be reversed. It should be 2 days on networking and 2 hours on resumes. So I started that about a year out. I started my LinkedIn page, which this was still early on, right? I mean, now I would tell people they should have them while they're on active duty or reserve, right? But back then it was still relatively new. So I started about a year out. And then about 6 months out, I started actively networking with people I was interested in. And then I came back to California, gave myself a few weeks of like decompression, and then really hit it hard, which would be 1 November of 2013. And then I ended up getting the way I spent it. So about 40 days networking, and then landed, I was at a Program Managers Institute. They're the ones who do the PMP certification. And I went and went to one of their meetings. They said, "Who's looking for a job?" And I'm like, "Okay, I got 30 seconds with 300 people." I'm like, this is the chance to spit through that 30-second elevator speech. And I tried to put in every hook I could: military, retiring, aircraft maintenance, program management, training, process improvement, all of those things. And the one that really popped up was the process improvement. I ended up getting 12 connections that day that led to where I'm at now, right? That I actually interviewed. So in terms of actual applications during that, like a lot of veterans, they think, "Oh, I'm going to apply online." I learned early on that was not very effective. So I probably did like 10 of them. So I learned that that's not an effective way. And I tell people not to do that. Same with job fairs, not very effective. We may talk that later or not, but that's how I did it, the networking. So that was my process: 2 years out for TAP, year out for LinkedIn, 6 months for kind of passive networking, 2 or 3 months out for active networking, and then like really hit it hard about 2 months away from retirement.
Yeah. So that's a fairly standard. I think my transition was pretty close. I started paying attention to my LinkedIn about a year out. My networking, I assumed my military network of recently retired people would be able to kind of float me, and I wasn't. But also, I knew I was making a huge industry shift from aircraft maintenance to law. So my network, there was not going to be a good bridge there between those two. How did you find, your network, you had to create your post-employment or post-military network ad hoc at that moment, right? That's what you were doing.
Yeah. And that's an excellent point. So when I was really proud, I'd set up my LinkedIn. And so I was working with two veterans who I still work with that help veterans transition. And one of them is a professor at a local university. And I'll go speak at his business class and try to help him out that way. And he said, "Look at your LinkedIn profile." He goes, "How many connections?" I said, "I have like 200. Like I said, all my friends have like 50. He's like, "And who's on your profile?" I said, "It's all my military friends, right? Yep. Mostly aircraft maintenance, mixed officer and enlisted. Like, how many of them have jobs in the industry you want to look in?" I'm like, that right. Would be 0. I said, "But if I wanted to on active duty, I'd be set." Yep. It's like, you need to make one connection a day, not in the military.
Yep.
So one a day. And I did that. Now, what's interesting now, if you look at my profile, because I still kind of use that, and I'll still connect with military, but whenever I post something on LinkedIn, I'm fairly active on it. 90% of the people who look at it are not military. So it means I've been successful doing that now. But interesting enough, most of the things that I do on LinkedIn are actually very much towards the military. I very much use that as a tool to try to educate, inform, and connect. It's just, I guess I've been successful building my contacts out of the military environment.
Well, that's because you are essentially a conduit, whether intentional or not. Because when you look at your transition and you looked at your military connections that were insulated from your future career, which was in healthcare, the gentleman told you, like, "Hey, those people are great, but they're not going to get you where you need to get." And what you've done is you've created an organic network based on your brand and your professional identity outside aircraft maintenance and outside the military. And what you're doing is then you start cross-pollinating those two communities through you. That's what you essentially do.
Correct.
Right?
That's exactly. Even
though you probably don't intend to, you're just trying to grab your new colleagues and like grab them by the arm and go, "Look at how great all these service members are. They're awesome. They're doing these amazing things. You never get to see it because a lot of times they're working in their own little bubble. You don't see it, but they're amazing. They would be great if we could work there. We need to help them." And at the same time, you're showcasing to the military people, "Look at these great organizations you didn't even know existed that you would probably be able to slot in beautifully." And what you're doing is you're creating a bridge between those two worlds.
That's a great way to put it. And because I'm an industry that's not commonly thought of as a place for veterans go, I do that exact bridge. I'm really educating both groups.
Yes.
about that. And I think that that's really important, because if I was in a different industry, I still think that the military private sector bridge is very important. But because I'm in an industry that people don't think of going into, I think it's even more important, because I am sharing stories from both groups to try to educate them. And ultimately, I think I'm trying to, as you said, with my new tribe, really trying to educate them on the value of veterans. And for the veterans, I'm trying to have them open up their aperture, if you will, to say, here's something you haven't considered. You need to consider this industry.
So how good do you think, or how adept are veterans at moving to a brand new industry during their transition? Because in my experience, I knew a lot of veterans that wanted to do as close to the same job they did in the military on the outside, because it's a softer landing, it's more stable, it's more familiar. Like, I mean, as we will and have talked about, me going from aircraft maintenance to becoming an attorney, that's a huge shift. There's not a lot I can cross-pollinate there. Same for you. I mean, yeah, there's some things, there's an organizational structure, there's a hierarchy, there's bosses and there's subordinates, and then there's regulations that your company has to follow, or else it's going to be big trouble. Accountability and general leadership toolkit stuff you developed in the military, obviously with a new sort of twist on it. But other than that, you knowing 8-hour fixed rate and repeat recur rate and how those two things relate to each other, that if your repeat recur rate's really high and your 8-hour fixed rate is also high, it's because everybody's pencil whipping fixes. Like, that doesn't translate at all to your new job.
No, it doesn't translate at all. So, but here's the thing, and you discussed earlier about how many veterans leave their first job. So what I would argue is, if they're trying to find the soft landing, and many of those, and my guess is a lot of those are veterans that also don't stay in those jobs, that they really didn't look hard at what they don't want to do and what they want to do, right? They just kind of did what they thought was easy. And I think if your goal is to make it easy, you're setting yourself up for a very low bar, right? Because if is easy the goal, if easy is your goal, you still have to answer why. If you don't answer, if you just say, well, it's easy because I've always been doing it, then I would say, then why don't you stay in? Well, I don't like it. You just told me you want to go into, and I understand being for you, doing military aviation on the civilian side is going to be different because you can have a beard and all those things, but you still have some of the same limitations, right? I mean, maybe some parts differences and things like that. But, if you truly loved what you were doing or hated what you're doing, then switch to do something exactly like, you may not want to do that. So really what I want, what I'm trying to have veterans do is really think about what you do and don't want to do, and be mindful about what you go into, so you don't end up in a job you're just going to leave really quick. Because then now you're like, well, I just did what I was doing for 4 years, 10 years, 12 years. Now I've left it. Now I have no plan, because I wasn't happy. I'm out of the military. I'm not happy working in an industry. Then what I do?
That's a good point. Like, I retired, and it was, I think I could have paid all my bills with how my finances were set up at that time, but I wasn't content with just keeping the lights on. And I got a job doing contract work on F-16s. And it felt exactly like being in the military, except I could put my hands in my pockets, wear sunglasses indoors, grow my hair out, and have a beard. But it was very much the same culture. And a lot of the reasons why I retired was, I legitimately, enjoy may not be the right word, but it's a very rewarding job working on aircraft, getting a jet fixed.
It is
getting a jet
very,
fixed, right?
very rewarding.
But it's all the other stuff that piles on that usually drives a lot of maintainers from wanting to get out, because it's all the extra stuff. But I knew I was going to leave that job because I knew I had other things on the horizon, but I was petrified, and I saw a lot of it, and I feel bad. I see a lot of people that the pay was so good for those jobs, they would just stay because the pay was good and they would put up with the same things. And I was really worried that I would be 72 years old and look back at my life, and all I could say the sum of my life was, I worked on F-16s. And to me, that might be enough for somebody. And I'm certainly not passing judgment, but for me, it just wasn't. And I wanted to do something different. And it really went back to a conversation I've had with a lot of young airmen, especially airmen that were separating. What did you want to be when you grow up? And it seems like such a trivial question that is almost patronizing, but it's true. Like, either in high school, what did you want to be? Or when you decided to join the military before you got your job, what did you envision doing in the military? Like, I think I wanted to do weather or something, or paralegal or something like that. It certainly wasn't aircraft maintenance. But I think that such a simple question at least speaks to an arena of where you want to be, which I think is often is a very useful. It's almost like it's a true north of what you really want to do. If money wasn't an object, what would you do? If money was not an object, what would be the thing you'd want to do? And I think a lot of people don't look at it that way.
It's interesting. You know, I still at work, I don't say what you want to do when you grow up, because that's very much a military. I say, what do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? Where do you want to go in 5 or 10 years? And I say, those are the steps you have to take today to get to that spot in 5 or 10 years. So I think the advice you were giving them is very correct. And that's that introspective, you know, what do you want to do? Then you should take those steps now. And that's part of what you transition. I say, what do I want to do? Then I need to take those steps to transition. And if you say, well, I want to do something I'm comfortable with because the money will pay, you're right. That may not be fulfilling, but you have to really make sure that is good enough for you. I think people think that'll be good enough for them, but they have to really understand. You know, I had an opportunity to interview for SpaceX, which is up in Hawthorne, which is LA. And remember earlier, I said, you have to know what you don't want to do. I said, I will not commute. I said, regardless. And I would have loved to done SpaceX. And because I had spent time in Space Missile Systems Center, you know, there's not a lot of people with space knowledge, right? Yep. It's not a huge. So even though the innovation and all of that would have been good, I'm like, it violated I did not want to commute. And I think that's why, you know, I almost think it's more important to say, what don't you want to do? Because I think some veterans like yourself who may say, I was in aircraft maintenance or I was a cop, I want to go do that. If they took them in to say, what do I not want to do? They may say, you know what, I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
That may not help them get to where they want to be, but that'll prevent them from getting into something that they don't want to be.
So I think what it almost kind of boils down to, and this seems almost too simplistic, but it might still be true, is really just the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. Most of the stuff in the military, especially when you get a job that you didn't ask for, almost everything is an extrinsic motivator. I don't want to go to prison for violating a lawful order. I don't want to get in a Loire. I don't want to get in trouble with UCMJ. I don't want to crash this jet. I don't want to kill this pilot. I don't want to do all these things. And you have a flight chief and an expediter, and you have all these people kind of breathing down your neck, keeping you on a very narrow sort of compliant path. And a lot of your motivation is literally just not to screw up or get in trouble, and you're trying to learn a little bit in the process. But when you're talking about what really speaks to you, because when you get out, there is not an expediter, there is not a flight chief, there are not all these people.
There is not. You have to own your own career. Right. This is almost a post-transition.
Yeah.
You do have to pick your, and I tell people, again, this is where I think, you know, in the military very much uses the up or out, which I actually don't think is a great thing. I really do think there should be career paths for people on both officer and enlisted who don't want to do up or out. Right. And I think especially in the technical fields, but in the private sector, because I feel that way, I'm like, hey, do you want to be really good as an analyst? Do you want to become an analytical person? You want to be someone who just, you know, produces A, then B, then C, just keeps going. Do you want to move into a leadership role? Do you want to move into a senior leadership role? It's really important because they don't have that career path laid out for them. So one of my roles that I have to do is I actually have to help the people on the team say, here's some multiple paths you have. Here's what you need to do to be successful. Interesting enough, I use, you know, the if you probably recall, the Air Force uses that career pyramid.
Yep.
I actually use that at work, modified, and that is no kidding. People refer to that as the career pyramid, and they love it. And I'm like, and then it was so funny. I had an Air Force, she separated. She was a captain. She was, she saw that and she goes, "You stole that from the Air Force." I said, "Of course." I said, "Everyone here loves it. They think it's the best thing ever because they've never seen it." But I had to modify it, right? I mean, but the difference is unlike when the Air Force sent that down to me. The difference was my team and myself had to build that.
Yep.
That's a big difference.
Yep. So you transitioned, and what was your position, or what was your general job that you initially got?
Yeah, so I started out in process improvement. So the hook I got was my background in process improvement, being a Six Sigma green belt and black belt. That got me in the door. That's what they were looking for. And what was interesting, so I did that for a grand total of 8 weeks, and I got
a long time.
Long time, yeah. So it was a long time, right? So I'm literally, it was Monday morning. I'm there doing I was an individual contributor, which means no one worked for me. It's the first time since I guess I'd been, I don't know if you include ROTC, the first time since I was 18. I didn't have anyone working for me. Feel? It was very liberating. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It was really good. In fact, I was in a meeting one time where I was helping facilitate, people doing process would do a lot of facilitation.
Yep.
And it was the senior leaderships, the directors, the vice president, senior vice president, they were having a budget drill. Now I was eating my lunch and they're doing this budget drill. I'm like, I said, I don't miss this at all. And it was funny because most of the people in even contributor drills hadn't necessarily been in leadership roles. So I was always kind of funny where I had a lot of leadership experience when I was in there. I'm like, this is great. So 4 weeks later, so I get called in on Monday morning, and kind of my supervisor as a senior vice president said, "Hey, so-and-so's leaving." And she spent about 15 minutes going through this. I said, "Oh, you're going to hire someone new and you want me to mentor them, right?" Which I said, "That's great." I said, we process improvement. She goes, "No, I want you to take over." I said, "But I've only been here 8 weeks." She goes, "Well, that's fine." So I moved from an individual contributor up to a senior director role. And then I did that for about 1.5 years, then moved into a vice president role, so as an executive role. And so I went from having no one working for me to now it's just slightly over 600 people. So it's been, so I went, it just kind of, I got to see the whole transition of transitioning as an individual contributor, which I think was great because I learned what it was like to do that. I can speak to that and the pros and cons of that. Now I moved into a leadership role. I did find when they actually asked me, people have asked me, when they asked you, because they asked me on my interview, "Are you okay now leading people?" I gave the honest answer. I said, "I'm perfectly fine." I don't know if they hadn't asked me to a leadership role, I may not have applied because I was very content. It was the funniest thing when she asked me about that. I said, I would like to do it. I said, but I need to ask my wife.
Yep.
Which they thought was really kind of odd because
really?
It was new. Yeah, new. They thought that was odd. It's a new position, and private sector compensation, all that thing goes with it. And they didn't ask why, but here was my reason. I knew the team I was taking over. I'd gotten the feeling there was a problem with them. Right.
You're looking at work-life balance.
Right. And so I told my wife, Diane, I said, "Look, I think there's a problem with this team." I said, if I'm going to do this, I need to kind of go, it's a little close. I need to go all in. I'm not going to just do it because it's prestigious. I said, because I think I can make life better for these people. And Diane and I have been together forever. We met in high school. We were 15. Actually, she was 16. So I used to tell people she was an older woman. I was 15. And she said, from the time you were 18 years old, you were trained to take care of people. Can you really say no if you think that there's people that can do it? And what's funny is I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And I remember when I first met my team, I had to, some team was local and the rest were another state. I went out there and I said, "Here's what we're going to do." I knew this is what we need to do, but I had no idea because I'd only been the price tag like 10 weeks. But I had no idea how any of this stuff worked. I said, "This is," I went kind of back, you said those basics, that toolkit. I said, "I'm going to go in that toolkit and really show them that I'm here for them,
Yep.
and I will figure out the rest. I had, I guess, confidence that I could find the right people, the right, let's call it, you know, the right technicians, right? If I want who can change the ADG, who can set up the flying schedule, right? If I can find those people in my new job, I felt I could then lead them through, and I guess by most definitions, it's worked out well in terms of, you know, transitioning. I've been there 7 years, had promotions, but mostly importantly, I truly enjoy what I'm doing and really care about the people, and they mean a lot to me. People work for me. So I guess that's why I would define not the title and position I'm in, that it means a lot to me to be there for my team and what we do for the people we serve.
So your transition, it went well. Like, would you have changed anything on your transition?
No, I wouldn't have changed anything. And originally I was actually wanted to try to move into a smaller company and kind of try. So when I also talked about what I want to do, I said, do I want to go into a small company, medium company, a large company? I said, I've been in a large company, right? What I found out early is that it was just too much of a leap to say, not only was I leaving the military and wanted to change industries, and I was moving to a location, not a job.
Yep.
It was just, I figured out it was going to be too much of a bridge too far. Not to say that vets can't go to small companies. I'm not saying that.
No, but you're trying to do so many things all at once.
Too many.
Yep.
It was too many. So I said, I'm going to cut down. So no, I think that I'm very happy I ended up at healthcare. Though it was short, I'm glad I came as an individual contributor, because I think if for no other reason, I think I can be a better advocate for veterans and help them transition, because if I would have moved right in a leadership role, also I would have think people would have said, they would have just assumed I moved in a leadership role because I was an officer, which is a really wrong takeaway from the story. If the takeaway is people listening, well, he's an officer, that's how he ended up executive. That is, I don't think absolutely not the takeaway.
I don't think that's the takeaway, but I think that is the norm in the civilian sector.
I'm going to disagree. I've seen a lot of officers.
You're probably more. You probably have more experience than me.
Is this the first time we've disagreed? So I think this is always.
But I'm already deferring. So now I'm just going to agree with your disagreement. But what I'll say is, I think most, maybe not most. I think a lot of officers expect to go into
I will agree. I will
positions.
Agree with you at that. And if they
they will turn down entry level or non-leadership positions.
I also agree with that. Right. I mean, I don't view the job I moved in as a step back, because I guess I don't view work as below a person.
Yep.
If they ask me to do a job and I'm qualified to do a job and I say I'll do that job, then I don't view that as below me. I just don't believe in the concept, right? I believe that if that's what you were going to want to do to make you happy, you should do it. Now there's a reason why I didn't want to go into defense. I did not want this, because I believe in defense. There's a little bit, well, you were a master sergeant, you will work for the retired senior master sergeant who works for the retired lieutenant colonel who works for the retired general.
Yep.
And I didn't want to be in that environment. The second thing is I wanted to see, could my skills, again, originally as an individual contributor, could the things I learned in the Air Force translate in an environment that was different?
Yep.
And I guess in the Air Force, I kind of proved that to myself when I went from aircraft maintenance to space systems and acquisition and back to aircraft maintenance. So I guess I do have a bit of a curiosity in me to see if I can take what I've learned before and apply it in a different manner, because I think that challenges a person more to apply the toolkit I learned in the Air Force, which has been invaluable. I will forever. If someone said, do you think you'd be here without your time in the Air Force? I say I would not be where I was without time. Now, others may say, well, whatever intrinsic skill set you have, maybe you would have been successful anyways. I can't refute that, right? Because there's no way to prove or disprove it. But I absolutely believe the Air Force helped get me there. But I say Air Force, so I also mean people like you. That's when I say Air Force, I'm talking just PME. I'm talking the people I met and helped guide me, and why I felt I was serving helped set me up for where I'm at now.
So you've probably seen veterans apply to jobs where you're at, right? either ones you've ushered in or ones that just come across the hiring committee or whatever.
Correct.
The process. What's your take on a veteran? I mean, I know you give a certain amount of deference just because of your experience. You understand the toolkit they're bringing better than other people that might be in the hiring position. But how do veterans present themselves compared to their non-veteran competition for job openings?
So in general, veterans assume everyone's going to understand them.
Yes.
And that's, I think, a lot of people who move into hiring positions who are veterans see that. So they'll put things like, military in general likes to be very specific, right? I remember, a resume of someone who ended up working for us he was in the Army. He put the actual name of the airborne school.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like, you're not coming here to jump out of airplanes. I said, if you were, the name of the school is irrelevant anyways. It's the skill set of jumping out of airplanes we're looking for. Right. I said, so that precision, actually, one, it takes space, and two, it doesn't mean anything to the people reading it, right? And then also, it may feed into an incorrect stereotype that military people can't break away, they have PTSD, all those things that are in other podcasts we're not going to talk about here, but those are very relevant in the hiring. You want the person to say, I want to hire them because they have the skill set I want. And their military help give them that skill set. That's what you're looking for. You're not looking to educate them on F-16, flight line, maintenance. That's not the goal, right? And I think that that's really hard for veterans to break with. The other key issue I see is that in the military, recruiters are the ones who bring you in, right? Yeah. You go to the recruiting office, or you talk to the RTC recruiter, or you talk to the academy recruiter, OTS recruiter, right? I think I've got everything nailed there. So I've left no one out. And the recruiter has the job. In the private sector, they also have recruiters, but the recruiters don't have the jobs. The hiring managers have jobs. So I hear veterans saying, I talked to a recruiter at this company.
Yeah, that guy has no power. He's just he's just trying to put people that meet certain basic whatever, just putting them in the pipeline to the hiring manager, who's going to not discriminate, but they're going to be the discriminator for deciding who.
The hiring manager has the ultimate authority. And a hiring manager is not often executive. It could be a supervisor, which in the private sector, supervisor. In the Air Force, anyone's a supervisor, right? You could be a general and you're a supervisor, but in the private sector, supervisor is usually your first people leader, as they say, the entry level people leader, which they may have a lot of experience too. They're making those hiring decisions. And veterans don't understand that connecting with the hiring managers is key. Now, there are some companies that say, we want to hire 2,000 vets or 1,000 vets. Well, in that case, a recruiter may have a cohort of positions, but still a hiring manager is going to be the one that says, I want these 5 veterans, right? Even if the recruiter brings them in, and the hiring manager is going to make that choice. So I think that that's the other thing besides demilitarizing the resume. It's the other piece is understanding hiring managers have jobs, not recruiters.
Yeah. So I had a similar experience as you. So I did the contract work on F-16s for a little bit, and then I knew I was moving to New England, and I got a job interview at a medical manufacturing company just west of Boston. And I was applying for like a regular, it was in robotics, and it was a regular mechanic position. I was not seeking the supervisory position. And I did a phone interview, and it went really well. I had just wrapped up my bachelor's degree, and I got done with the phone interview, and the hiring manager who was on the interview, he's like, hey, you haven't done a lot of maintenance recently, but you have a lot of supervisory experience recently. Do you want to instead consider the supervisor position for this? I think you'd be a good fit. It's like, sure. I was starting at the lowest level. I was trying not to be picky, and I flew out for an interview, and it went really well. And I got hired on immediately. It was in medical manufacturing, ironically enough. So once again, it was not super duper related to aircraft maintenance. And it was a great company. Unfortunately, the commute for me, it was 2.5 hours each way every day.
So you didn't use my theory of you got to know what you don't want to do. If you would have listened to me, you would not have taken that.
No. You had the benefit of you already had a house. I had to have a job in order to get a house. So I was taking any job. It was really what it was boiled down to. And the compensation was excellent. And unfortunately, I just couldn't handle. I mean, I was doing 1,000 miles a week in my car.
Right.
I ran out of podcasts. I literally was running out of podcasts. I'd ask people for podcast recommendations, and now I started a podcast, and I don't go anywhere. So it's like I've totally flipped. But being a supervisor was, I realized because I showed up and I was like, okay, well, where's my team? They're like, the recruiter's going to start sending you people. You need to start looking at resumes right away. You need to start doing this, and it's like, oh, holy cow! And it was, I mean, I wasn't I was not the person that made the decision, but I was building my team, so my recommendation was very heavily influencing a hire or not hire. And unfortunately, I had to walk away from the job. And since that company has soared as far as profits and stock stuff. So,
You mentioned one of the things I love about the private sector is building your team.
Yeah.
It's interesting you hit at that. And I really, maybe that's the thing I enjoy the most is having that freedom. Now, I will say there's a flip side. Because I have the responsibility, along with the supervisors and managers and directors on my team, if I pick a good team, that's great. But if I don't, I'm held accountable. That's a little bit different. In military, AFPC sends you and you kind of get what you get. And you have to mold them, right? We've all seen good leaders, bad leaders, toxic. With the military leaders kind of very much influence. But here, there is no AFPC sent me so-and-so. I'm making the hiring decisions, promotion decisions, and not unilaterally, right? Doesn't exist, but within the system we have. But there's a lot of latitude. So that's on me. But I like that. If I want to put time, energy, and even money into developing my team, is what I do. I'm given that latitude. But it's on us to make sure we get those results.
Man, it's huge too. Just like think about all the times where you were in the military and promotions came out and you ran to the list because there were specific people you were like, man, I hope Pete Saccone makes staff. I hope Pete Saccone makes, whoever it was. I always hope Pete Saccone gets promoted. He doesn't listen, so he'll never hear that. But I always hope he gets promoted. And then he wasn't on the list. And you're like, oh, man. And you're like, what could we do? Whereas in the civilian sector, it's like you get to, I mean, they might turn it down because they don't want the extra responsibility or whatever it is. But you get to perfectly move the people up into the positions they've grown into. There's maturity. They can do that. And the military they just can't do that for what, I mean, there's step promotion. There's these weird sort of, sidebar sort of pathways to promotion. But the reality is most of the time with promotion, it's a black box or it's just a unfeeling cold test.
And you only have once a year, right? Yeah. And that's the thing. I have all year long, right? I mean, and so I don't have to in the military, like, well, they're not quite ready, but we don't want to miss this opportunity. Yep. I don't have say, you know what, I need 3 or 4 months. I need them to work on these few other things. And then when they're ready, right? So I think that, again, it goes back to we're talking about transitioning, right? We could, again, different podcasts, maybe on leadership in the private sector. Yeah. But certainly, again, I think that this does help in terms of veterans transitioning, of understanding what motivates you, right? If you say, I really want to develop a team, that's understanding in the private sector, you have that ability, right? So if you say, you know what, I like leadership, I don't really want to develop a team, then you may have a little bit of a struggle even if you can get a job applying. And what you said was not uncommon, right? Especially if you have a good interview. Like with me, at the time, I didn't know it, but now I knew it. When they interviewed me, they were very aware of my background. What they were trying to do is build their bench. Now, I don't think that they thought 8 weeks later they would go to me, because they took, I think they wouldn't have hired me if they didn't thought I'd be good as a black belt. I believe that, right? They didn't know how I developed as a leader, and they didn't really have enough time. They had to make a gut decision, say, okay, well, we brought this person to build the bench. We're going to pull the trigger. It's on them to do that, right? So I think that's kind of very important for people to understand when you're in the private sector and you're transitioning. What happened with you, I guess similar stories happened to me. There's just was delayed 8 weeks. So they can definitely move you, and you have to understand when you're transitioning, when they bring that up to you, do you want to do that or not?
Yep. So what is your experience? I noticed at one job I was at very briefly they were only looking to hire officers. They didn't, or officers were the only ones that were being considered for, I don't think it was director. Maybe like a senior supervisor, so whatever was that space between like a director and a senior supervisor. They were not
Manager?
considering, yeah, maybe, and they just were not willing to consider enlisted people. And I think it's because there was an officer in one of those positions, and they had created like, because I think it goes back to what you're saying. I think a lot of people in the civilian sector, they just don't understand the military rank structure, and then they just got attached to the officer moniker.
Yeah, someone had to have taught them that, because really, again, my job does not a lot of military, right? They don't even understand the concept of officer enlisted. And what's funny is we're so used to that, but it's actually a little bit harder to explain. It's out of context,
Yeah.
right? I mean, think of we very much like even think like flight line maintenance versus back shop, which is funny because I think most of us, is not to say back shop in the depot is not important, right? But flight lines. So, but the thing is that I actually, if you just explain flight line maintenance, it may sound like the back shop or depot is more important, right? If I literally ask people who are saying, no, you're wrong, Kevin, I'm like, if you kind of explain, I'd say, what did you do in flight? I said, we launch, recover the airplane, we put gas, we load the munitions, and we change the parts. Or like, well, it doesn't sound like lying. Like, okay, I didn't explain it very well. I say, we do on aircraft maintenance. But sheet metal comes out and actually works on the aircraft, also on maintenance, but they're actually back shop, right? So it's kind of interesting. So someone probably told me, because what I have found that unless, if someone who's a, staff sergeant who has the qualifications to be X, whatever, if that qualification may or may not be a degree, it may be 5 years experience, right? Then they can. Now people say, can a staff sergeant get a director position? Well, a director position, they may need 20 years experience, right? So not many staffs are going to have 20 years of experience to jump into that role. So they must have been, someone must have said, this is what an officer list. I've been very, for me, I've had more Army and Navy veterans join my team than Air Force, right? Because I kind of just want to help veterans. I've helped more enlisted than officers. I've helped people who transitioned after a few years. I've helped people so I've not been retired Air Force officers. That's been a very tiny percentage. There's some that fit in that demographic. In fact, I had mentioned Air Force captain. She came in at an entry-level position on the team, not a leadership team. She's an individual contributor, right? She worked for someone who's younger than her, right? That's the role she's in. She's doing a great job in that role. That's fine. She didn't move into a leadership role. If she wanted to move a leadership role, she could work that direction, right? It's really, it's the pick your own, adventure. So I'm not going to disagree with you. I think that absolutely some people try to pigeonhole officer enlisted, but that's only because someone's told them to think of it that. They're not doing that on their own.
And I think it also goes back to what you're saying, where it's harder to explain than we realize, because the initial hack is, okay, the officer has a degree and the enlisted doesn't. And like, well, wait a minute,
it's not really accurate.
The enlisted people have degrees, so are they officers? Well, yeah, but they're not. They don't have a commission. They're an officer, but they're not commissioned. Like, I don't understand. They have a degree and they're a non-commissioned officer. That's an officer. It's not. Totally different. Never mind. But and it's probably like it was just one person learned that the officers have these certain skill sets, and that's what they always kind of went with. What I experienced is, because the company I was with, they were looking to hire veterans. After I got hired on and I turned around and started trying to build a team, I started seeing a lot of veteran applicants. And what struck me one time was I got an F-16 crew chief applicant. And I'm looking at, it actually wasn't for my team. He was for the swing shift. I was the mid shift supervisor. It was for the swing shift supervisor. He still had a few slots to fill. And I took a look at the resume and I'm like, oh, this guy's a F-16 crew chief. And I started reading the resume and I could see the lies in it. And I was like, what is going on here? And he's like, well, I'm about to do a phone interview with him. Do you want to just sit in, or do you want to lead the interview? I was like, yeah, I'd love to lead the interview. Let me ask some questions about these things. And basically I did the Columbo routine. And you and I are probably old enough to remember Columbo, and a lot of people listening may not be old enough to remember Columbo. But if you ever want, I used Columbo, the Columbo character. I use it as a flight chief, and now I use it in law school all the time when I do witness stuff. But like Columbo is a really good model for how you get people to tip their hand when they're not telling the truth, because he basically acts like a bumbling idiot for the whole episode, but he's actually a secret genius that's been paying attention to all these little details. And what he does is he lulls the person into a sense of confidence or superiority because he's obviously so dumb, and then he basically has built a logic trap through all the questions he's asked. And he's always like turning around with his notebook. Oh, by the way, you said that actually you're here at 7. How could you possibly be at 7 when? And then they're like, oh man, this guy got me. And so I did the Columbo routine with this guy, and I was just asking about all these things on his resume. And it was like, I think he just didn't expect there to be another I mean, that's also bad luck. You have
the
have
chance
an F-16 subject matter expert reading your resume. But I think it's a lesson. You don't know who's going to be reading your resume. You don't know what they did in the past life. You don't know what their experience is. And you need to be like, my resume doesn't have any lies in it. I can talk
so this is
all the things in my resume. Yeah.
Because this is important for veterans. Did he get hired?
I ended up saying, this wasn't true. This wasn't true. This wasn't true. But he probably did X, X, and X, in which case he's capable of this lower level position he's applying for. And the odds of him running into an F-16 expert reviewing his resume is so low that it's just bad luck for him. I ended up recommending him, but I don't know if he got hired.
I tell veterans that they should not inflate their resumes, right? I mean, they should be very much spot on with it. Now, I do tell them that they need to make words that are easy to understand, right? So I tell them you don't want to have it, earlier I said you don't want to be super precise, but you want to make it understandable. Understandable does not mean inflate or put things that are not true, right? So you want to make it so the person can very much understand, what they're reading, but it is very unlikely. I mean, most companies, again, even the stereotype of there's a lot of veterans in defense. What's interesting is I actually saw some stats a few years ago, probably in the 50s and 60s, you saw, a Northrop Grumman, when they weren't Northrop Grumman, a Grumman, right. 67% veterans. And part of that's because of the World War II era and Korea, where a lot more people served, right? But now a lot of these defense companies, you go to a larger defense company, they only may be 17, 18% veterans themselves, right? And I think there's this misperception they're full of veterans, because that's not actually the case. So you really need to make sure that the person can understand. And in line, because if you end up with bad luck, obviously in this case, he had been an F-16 crew chief. So maybe he was a TODO, right? That's what he would end up doing.
So, yeah. So I guess the trick is just assume someone that knows, that can read through the lines, is going to be reading your resume. Because the reality is, if you plan for, in my case, if you plan for a guy that's been working F-16s for 20 years to be the guy that's hiring you, write your resume as such. Because, he was saying that he was a floor chief in phase, and that he had, streamlined the phase flow for the fleet. And I was like, wait a minute, isn't that what the lead pro super does? And that should have been a dead giveaway that, wait a minute, this guy knows more than he's letting on, because he's talking about lead pro supers in phase flow. But the trick is, write your resume as if a subject matter expert on what you've written down is going to be reading it, but you should still write it in a language that is easily digestible for somebody that's not.
Bingo.
That's the trick.
Yeah.
And I got feedback too. I applied for an internship and I didn't get an interview. And luckily the woman that was the hiring manager emailed and said, hey, we had some great candidates. We didn't choose you. If you'd like, I can go over why we didn't choose you. And I was like, absolutely. Which, by the way, strongly recommended. If you ever don't get a job after an interview, or you get denied and they offer to basically explain why you weren't picked, take it. Shelve your ego and 100% take it.
Yeah.
She sat down with me and she's like, you're the only person that said they wanted to do it. And one of her overriding comments was, you need to pare down all of your military experience into one single block of information. Like, I have over a page of all my stuff. She's like, that should be like 3 or 4. Pick one bullet out of each one of these sort of jobs, put it into one, because you have way too much stuff here. It just
Chris, that's interesting because, and I agree with you on that. So I get all the time asked for resumes, and resumes are a necessary part of the process that we talked earlier. Networking is by far the most important piece. When I got hired at my company, I fit everything into a single page.
Yeah.
So it was a 20-year career, through my master's degree, through PME. I had to put in my process improvement because that was very, very relevant. So I fit it all on one page. I see veterans give me 3 or 4 pages. So look, I said, let's be honest, part of showing in the one page, and it was a good, especially if I look back in retrospect, saying I hadn't been in the private sector, I feel pretty good about what I put together.
Yep.
I'm like, the point is, it was a good enough resume, but I fit it all on one page, and that's led to where I'm in now. So don't get hung up on, I need to have 3 or 4 pages in my resume. If it's one page, boil down to the key points. It gets seen. If you're prepared for the interview, you understand the company, and you're what they need, a one-page resume will be more than adequate.
Yep, it's true.
And it helps you be succinct, which is when you're interviewing, it also tells you, can you very much articulate why they should hire you? Someone once said, what you're trying to convince a company is take money out of their pocket and put it in your pocket. So it's up to you to convince them that you're the one they want to give their money to.
Yep.
And being succinct about that will very much help.
Yep. It's counterintuitive. Like, I got down, I was like, I can't fit my 20-year career into one page. I have 2 pages. And she's like, you can. You just have to get rid of the stuff that's less important than the other stuff. You need to get it down, because I'm not going to wade through all this stuff. She said the most interesting part of your resume is where you talk about breeding tarantulas as a hobby. I really wanted to talk to you, but I just couldn't justify it based on tarantulas alone. So I'm like, well, I obviously need to retool my resume then if that was the part.
Yeah, that would have been interesting, but I probably would have recommended not having, unless you were going for a tarantula breeding job, then I would have said, be all over that. I would have absolutely said,
it was more in the interesting facts. It was like
I still would have told you to pull it out. I would have found it interesting, but I would have said, pull it out unless you're going for breeding tarantulas. I would have probably agreed with her. Very interesting, not bringing you in for an interview.
Yeah, it was legit. So good on her. I mean, and then I know who she hired, and she hired a great person. So her process is obviously pretty strong. And
not a tarantula breeder, I'm going to guess too.
No, she's not. But also, that's a bit of a rare thing.
Yeah.
So, I'll tell you what, too. I get a lot of friend requests on Facebook from people that listen to the show or read the blog or just kind of stumble upon the Facebook page. And even though it might seem counterintuitive considering the stuff I talk about in this podcast, this is not, it's personal, my Facebook page. It's like my family interacting. But especially based on this topic and you and I talking about how important LinkedIn is, I'll say right now, if anybody listening that's about to transition or is in the military and their LinkedIn is kind of small or whatever, if you're a listener and you just want to connect on LinkedIn, you're 100% welcome to hit me up on LinkedIn. My name's Chris McGee. Last name's spelled McGhee. I'll probably actually include a link in the comment section for the show on the page, maybe. Kevin, similar offer for you, I assume?
Yeah, I'm happy to have people reach out to me on LinkedIn or Kevin Traw. And what's funny is there's a lot of, I'll say early on veterans I connect with whose LinkedIn pages look very similar to mine. I'm not saying mine is the best, but military loves a copy. So I have a lot of my early transition friends, their LinkedIn page is exactly like mine, which is fine, right? I mean, and I would tell people there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to go on there and you say, hey, I have a similar career, and I'd say similar means, 10, 15 years, more aircraft, but not officer enlisted, I think applies for both, right? And you could use the same thing. Now, we talk about LinkedIn, there's a lot, and I have some probably one of my closest friends. Like he's doesn't use the term like in his work, and he's a avid supporter of veterans. I would say very much equal to me in helping dozens of people. Many people in his company don't even know he's a veteran, right? He serves and helps veterans that way. On his page, you're not going to find. For me, everyone who runs in my atmosphere in my company knows I'm in the military. In my LinkedIn profile, it highlights, it talks about what it shows you is there are different approaches, right? So on mine, though my private sector work and what I think I want to highlight is there, but because I use my LinkedIn not for finding jobs, but for connecting with veterans and connecting veterans you talked about earlier to people in my industry, it's tailored for that, right? So understanding that's what I'm trying to use it for. I'm not using it for job hunting. I'm using it for connecting veterans and people in the private sector, predominantly, healthcare. But it's a critical tool. I do a lot of finding candidates utilizing LinkedIn. And for me, I put articles on LinkedIn about veterans transitioning. I actually put on there about transitioning leadership skills, interviewing skills. So I put those things out there to I kind of make them as checklists, for lack of a better term, to try to help veterans making points. In general, I'm not looking for agreement. I think many people find what I say, but I tell people my advice, some of it is universal. Some of it is for a large healthcare company, right? Compensation is industry dependent, right? I think concepts are similar, like negotiating pay, benefits, that's more of a universal, but what an industry pays and bonuses and other benefits is going to vary from industry to industry, right? So, and one thing you should do in your transition we haven't talked about is understand the pay and compensation. That is critical in understanding. You mentioned earlier about the company you work for has done really well. In the private sector, the success of your company, and do they offer stock purchase plans? And I'm not talking stock grants to executives. That's a different topic. I'm talking allowing you to purchase their stock at a reduced price. That can be a huge, thing. And guess what? None of us understand that in the military, right? Because we didn't buy Air Force stock and Army stock, right? So even if you went to school and learned about it, or in your high school economics class that made you buy stock and all that, and learn it, that doesn't apply. You could be doing really good in a company that's struggling, and that will have a big impact on your compensation versus if you're doing fine, but in a company that's blowing up, that can have it. So understanding the compensation principles. I had someone who reached out to me about a nonprofit, and we were talking. So I heard you can negotiate pay, and we kind of talked. I said, well, it's a nonprofit, a little bit different. He says, I don't think the pay or bonus is negotiable. I go, okay. I said, let's kind of take them at the word. Let's assume that's true. I go, how many days off do you get? He goes, I get 5. I said, you used to get 30. I said, how is that sitting? He goes, I don't like it. I said, well, technically in the private sector, time off is a piece of compensation, right? Where in the military, it's not. I said, but it is a nonprofit, so it's a little bit different. I said, why don't you negotiate for more PTO? He goes, I can do that. I said, all they'll tell you is no. I think he got like 20 days a year.
Yeah.
They said yes right away. And I tell veterans on negotiate, I said, as long as you negotiate in good faith and you understand what the role is, you can negotiate. Now, if it's a supervisory position, supervisors are being paid $60,000 a year, and you say, I'm going to ask for $392,000. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right? You got it. But if you say, well, 60 is what my research has said, this kind of position, but I think I bring these other skill sets to the team and I have this experience, I'm going to ask for 66,000, 67, do it. Right? I mean, but you have to explain why, because they're not going to just give you more money. Right? Now, what I didn't say, a lot of veterans say, are they always trying to? No, the companies do not want to undercut you. They want to compensate you based on your role and your experience, right? Yep. So understanding as a veteran what the job pays and the company structure and benefits, and understand, because you may say, wow, it's really great. I'm going to get this. In fact, that same veteran, he got offered a lot more by a green energy company. I said, well, let me look at their SEC filings, right? Because that's where you want to find publicly traded companies. Go look at what the stock and all those, I think the 10K are on that.
Yep.
And I went through, I said, they're having a lot of turnover. I said, they're paying you more because they're having trouble keeping employees because they're struggling. And I believe they went out of business like a year later, he told me. Right. So, do your research. I think that my advice certainly helped him as he transitioned to not end up somewhere that wouldn't have worked out. The compensation seemed big, but he ended up someplace he's happy, got the time off and that he was looking for. So I think that when you're looking at veteran transition, you have to very much understand the compensation piece.
So when I was working at that company in Massachusetts, I knew, and I had already given notice, I was looking for a more local job. And I found one in a manufacturing place that was 15 minutes away. And the pay was enough, certainly enough, but it was a little bit less than there. But between the miles I was putting on my car and everything else, I was probably making the same amount of money. And I went for an interview and, I go in, it's a veteran that's I think he was the vice president he was in charge of operations. My boss would have been, he was a veteran and he had this, you could just see he exuded servant leadership. He had all the stuff for it. And I wasn't familiar with the industry, but I knew I'd be able to figure it out. And he had he liked me and liked what the things I was kind of presenting and what I would do. And I met the supervisor and I started asking questions. It's like, how often do you work on the weekend? And she's like, well, I work every weekend, but that's because we're down a supervisor. Okay, well, is there a weekend shift? And is there a weekend supervisor? Well, no, typically the swing shift supervisor covers the weekends. That's how it works around here. Okay, and I'm going for this swing shift
supervisor.
Okay, and she looked burned out, like she couldn't. And it came down to, I was like, I'm not willing to give up that huge chunk of my life again, because the reality is I don't actually need this much money. And I think it's really important, like you said about the compensation, the time off. I ended up getting a job making 75% what that other job was offering that I turned down, but I was getting 20 days of vacation year and 20 days of sick year, and every hour I worked over 40 hours went into a separate account where it was a 1-for-1 for time off. And if it snowed, I worked for a college. If I snowed and the college was a snow day, it was a free day off for me, and it wouldn't be charged to any of my leaves. So it was like, yeah, the pay isn't as high, but I'm paying all my bills. But the relaxation, the time off, the boss, it was all a family. If I needed time, it was no big deal. If I got up in the morning and my back was killing me and I didn't feel like driving for 2 hours, I was like, I'm sick today. That's just how it's going to be.
People really have to think about the compensation. People get really hung up on what that dollar amount. I think a lot of it goes into ego because it makes them feel good or bad and all that. And certainly I would argue that if money is your ultimate goal for most people, I've had this kind of, the military pays very well.
It does.
Right? And especially you put in your benefits. I mean, for retirees, we have TRICARE, which is fantastic, right? And people we're so much taught about how our compensation is bad in the military, when it's very, very good. So I think that people, have this misunderstanding. And so I think you gave a great example of finding that balance, what's important. Again, that's what I said. That's why I led off with knowing what you don't want to do and what you do want to do. I think if you do that and then you fill in everything else, the comp will follow, the time off will follow. And, my company gives very generous time off. And I very much like that. I appreciate the time we're able to do stuff with the family, or just take a day here and there. I can say, I just need a breather today. I'm going to take a day off and work around the house and do some manual labor and things of that nature. If someone only gets 10 days, that's really hard to say. I'm just going to take a day where I'm going to work around the house, because I only have the 9 other days to take. That's like one vacation and a little bit, right? So I really think that I'm glad you kind of brought that up. Your kind of different stories about what factors went into you getting your again, it's total comp, not pay. And people I think pay because that's the military. You need to look at total comp.
And then really what we're talking about is this is your chance to pick your workplace, the culture. You can observe how they behave, how they treat their employees. You can read about, on what Glassdoor and all these other websites, like what is the turnover like you said, the SEC 10K filings and stuff like that. This place, I knew it was going to be good. I was really lucky to get a job there. And interestingly enough, they had a bit of a budgetary windfall because their director retired and they didn't fill the position. The two managers essentially split the duties of the retired director.
Right.
You know what they did? They distributed that retired director's salary out to everyone, and retroactively to the date I was hired paid me more. Like they didn't even start. They reached all the way back when they hired me. Like, we're going to pretend like we were going to pay you this the whole time.
Yeah, it's really understand the company culture is critical, right? Because you should veterans are saying you're interviewing them, or you should, as much as they're interviewing. I think a lot of veterans don't think about that. They just want to get to the job, right? I tell people you should research the company and look what their goal is, right? And really understand, do you want to be in the industry and why? Now, I will tell you, it's a bit of a culture shock and probably a different topic, but it was hard. My first few days were very hard because how we in processes, but they don't call it in processing, right? But we call it processing, and something we don't realize in military, military has a very, very strong culture. I love how you guys on the podcast use the term tribe. I actually started, in fact, I had an all hands meeting yesterday, and I actually talked about veterans transitioning, and I talked about the stats about veterans and not saying the first job. I said, and I was talking about in terms of I&D about understanding, differences and the struggles that people have. So I think that it was a struggle, right? So if you're in a company you like and you're in a role you like, an industry you like, it's still going to be hard to transition. It was the first few days, it was too quiet for me, right? You don't realize in the military and I'm not just talking on the flight. I'm talking when I was in the Pentagon, just the hustle and bustle and the joking and, the way the cubes are set up, and you grab a buddy to go do something, or there's fun and games and things like that. And I get there, it's really quiet. I remember looking up a few times, is like people alive, right? It was almost what they say, the silence was deafening. Right. And then of course there's the funny stories, which I'll have one. So my third day, again, I was an injured contributor. We're going to have a lunch meeting. So I'm like, oh, great. No big deal, right? Because how many lunches did we miss, right? And so
was it a brown bag lunch meeting?
Yeah, well, that's part of the story, right? So I go lunch meeting. I'm fine now. Lunch meetings are a little bit less common, right? But I'm with me coming military, I'm like, that's totally fine. So I come in with my lunch bag, right? And it's the normal green kind of military thing, right? So you can kind of strap it over your shoulder and, bring my water bottle. And I go and I sit down, right? And they're like, Kevin, what are you doing? I'm like, well, we're going to have lunch. And I brought my lunch. They're like, why did you bring your lunch? I said, I'm going to get hungry, right? I said, I need to eat. I said, I run a lot in the morning. I get up early. I said, I know I'm going to be hungry.
You're thinking to yourself, I've been in the military. I can actually not eat and I could just do the eating, but I felt like I retired. I get to eat at these.
That's what I said, right? Like, I think I can eat now. I'm like 42. I'm going to eat, right? I'm like, you guys have to let me. And they said, we're bringing lunch in. I'm like, you're bringing lunch in? I'm like, okay. I said, that's fine. I said, I'll throw in whatever. I brought my own lunch. I'm not going to be that guy, right? Who won't pay for the pizza. Like, no, we pay for it. I'm like, you pay for lunch? And they're like, the Air Force didn't pay for lunch. I said, I don't think they particularly cared if I even ate. You were
like Oliver Twist at the orphanage.
Right. I'm like, no.
Lisa, can I have another?
Right. You remember during exercise in Korea, you'd go scrounge around for leftover cookies. No, there only was the oatmeal raisins. Everyone ate the chocolate chip. Right. So the only oatmeal raisin left. So, which were terrible. But So yeah, so that's not cultural. And we laugh at like, so if you're not happy with your industry and you haven't picked it, you haven't culture, can you imagine them putting on those funny things like if it's too
Yeah.
quiet, not understanding lunch, and then those things are really having trouble transitioning. And I really felt early on is even though I wasn't leadership, I really felt an obligation to really help other veterans. And I actually, the people that helped me transition said, I'm going to help you when I get there. And I think they hear that a lot, but I called them, said, I'm going to help. And I started trying to help them right away. And I really talked to veterans trying to make them, feel comfortable with the transition because as you said, by definition, I had a successful transition, right? If any metric you could lay out, it was successful, but it was still hard, right? I mean, even to this day, it's a little bit silly, but I love my team. I care deeply about them. But I miss the military people, right? I miss seeing the plane take off and land. I miss, going out there and playing, dodgeball, and the goal is to knock someone's head off if you can, right? I mean, and everyone goes bananas, and I miss at 2:00 in the morning, wandering around the fly line when everyone else is asleep, and you're like, just having a random conversation that only people in the military have, because the price are like, well, we're not going to have a random I'm not going to meet with you at 2:00 in the morning to philosophize. Right. But I don't know how many times I remember being deployed, right, sitting around a rock. I remember I was a first lieutenant and there was a senior airman and we were arguing pay, right, at 2:00 in the morning, right? Because that's just what you just have these random discussions, right? And,
Kevin, it's 11 p.m. where I am right now when we're recording. So
good point.
We're doing it.
We're doing it. Yeah. So it's very, so that's a culture. So again, that's why I really hammer down, right? I mean, you mentioned like, this is like a smoke pit, right? And you don't have that. So again, that's why I'm really want to emphasize about understanding your transition, because you won't have those people, those cultural things that you're around. And I'm talking the good cultures. I'm not talking the negative, right? I'm talking the good cultural things. And it just makes it, I really think a lot of veterans quit because the job only hits on a few of the factors. And because they're separated from that kind of culture. I mean, just yesterday, it was just a random, I actually had a picture of, someone's changed of command, and it was me and another person's retired. And the person I had mentioned how my team who knew that person, who was a captain, separated from the Air Force, said, I worked with that person. I called her right away because like that's still that connection.
Yeah.
Like, and she's been on my team for 3 years, but like, this is a chance to talk about someone we knew together. Like it's crazy how 7 years later that when I can make that connection, I just felt the urge I had to talk to her because you still crave that. Right. So again, I think that's really important. You have to find that in your transition, find those things so you can really kind of, be successful and make it to that 2, the 3, the 4, the 10-year point. If you want, in private, you can move around more, but don't leave because you didn't do your research. Do your research so you end up where you want to be.
Yeah. So especially with the pandemic, but it seems as you talked about earlier, networking is going to do the heavy lifting for your transition and every job transition thereafter. Certainly you can submit your application to the automated system and you might get lucky and a human being will look at it and say it's good. And same with your resume, if you can write a good one. But networking, actual connections type of deal, like I've known you for going on 15 years now. You know me really well through, all the advocacy work I do, and, we're friends on Facebook. So if for whatever reason, I was like, man, I really want to work for your company, you would very likely give me a recommendation. Chris will be great. He's here.
Absolutely.
Right. That's like a natural organic network. And I have quite a few people like that, mostly in the defense industry, but scattered in all these places. Those are the people I can go to if I need a little bit of help for a particular job. But the reality is, unless I was to get lucky and I wanted to work for your company or something close to your company, you can't do a whole lot for me networking wise, just on a person to person level. And that's really where the LinkedIn comes in, even more so during COVID-19, when there aren't a lot of face-to-face get-togethers, and a lot of the networking became virtual and through LinkedIn. And I don't know of anything that's close to LinkedIn as far as professional networking, social network, or close.
No,
to
I mean, I think there's others, but I think LinkedIn. So really kind of talk about, we're talking about network. So one, I'd say LinkedIn. That's the first thing. Second thing is, call pre-code, eventually go, like, I would say find industry type meetings, or I mentioned I got mine through Program Management Institute. So kind of, if there's training ones or civil engineering ones or mechanic ones, go to those kind of industry or those specialized skills that go to their meetings and network. And they're networking is not a dirty word. Do that. Right. And I will say the one caveat on recruiters, and you can use LinkedIn for this. If you can find companies that have dedicated military recruiters, reach out to them. Now, they may not have a job, but you can use LinkedIn. And I found them on LinkedIn. I was able to find them even when I was job hunting, and there's much more of these groups now on LinkedIn, and find and network in. If you can't do that, you can blind email someone on LinkedIn. Understand they may not respond. You may not get that. Now, what I would say, what I've learned is I've had veterans reach out and say they don't want to work in my industry. Do they know someone in airlines? I've already kind of mentioned this. Someone who's a really close friend. I have referred people over to him, and he's done it in reverse, right? So I think when you look at that, connections is if you know someone who can advocate for you, because certainly if you know people, if you came to me and said, I want to work for an airline, I would go to this person who's known me for almost 30 years, say, absolutely hire Chris. And if he had an opening, that would be enough.
Yep.
But there's others who know me somewhat who would say, okay, I know Kevin, I know his background. I don't know him that well, but he's recommended to me this person. If they interview well, they got the background, also hire him, because that's still more of a connection than not knowing them at all. Right. Yep. So you can use, kind of giving, those are a few techniques on how to do the networking, whether it's, this is different societies and groups, or, utilizing LinkedIn to get you contacted with people is a very effective way to be. You have to network. I think the percentage of someone, it's not common to talk to veterans, say, I've applied to 100, and I'll tell, I say, and you've gotten 0 interviews. They go, how do you know? I said, because I've been doing this now for a long time. I said, if you told me you got 2 interviews out of 100 applicants, they say, well, we hear 1% get a job for applying. I said, that doesn't mean if you do 1,000, you're going to get 10. It doesn't quite work like that, right? I said, you really have to get, the most effective networking is when someone contacts me, I say, here's jobs I think you're qualified for. Go look at them. They say, yes, I do think I'm qualified. And then I email the recruiter or hiring manager, say, so-and-so. In fact, just today, I did that exact thing, working with the veteran from Luke, who I've been working with, and a few others are working with. I sent him his resume. I said, apply, I'll send your resume. And by the recruiter I sent it to is part of what I'd call the veterans group. She's not a veteran, but she's part of our veterans advocacy and hiring veterans. So I sent it to someone who's going to, she said, hey, Kevin, I will absolutely take a look. Veterans also can't get bent when that doesn't get them a job.
Right.
I said what I said on purpose. Kevin, I will take a look. When you're trying to network, that is a victory. Yes, getting the job is not doing, but when someone says, I'm going to look, in my mind, yes, I want to get this person job. I think they'd be a great fit for our company and I want to help him out. But ultimately, we both view it as a great victory if he gets his resume looked at, because you do that enough times, then it's going to be an interview and then it's going to be a hire. Right. So
that was all I ever wanted, was a human being to look at my application. And if I can get in for an interview, I'm going to kill it. But
and that's exactly the way you need to look at it, because that's where that is then where that resume becomes important. It's not help. It's not needed to get you there, but once you're there, that resume pops out. Right. And for me, I've been on hundreds of interviews now on the hiring side, but what's very interesting is a few months away from 50, I've only had 2 interviews in my life. Well, 3. I had my screening interview where I'm at now. I had my first interview where I'm at now. I had my second interview where I'm at now, right? So I guess I'm 100% successful on interviewing, though I don't have a lot, but which is really interesting about, again, because I think that people, again, they'll look at my profile, they'll say, well, Kevin's been successful. He must have had this really well planned out, especially since he started working 5 days before his transition. Now, some of that was planned, right? I saved up my leave and I got my family back to the States. I didn't mention I actually transitioned from overseas on an Army base in NATO. So I kind of made it all very difficult on myself. But I remember, so one of my screening interview, which was online, right? The recruiter called me. I actually had my suit hanging in case he wanted to go. I can't remember what we were using 7 years ago because I didn't know, right? We never went on camera, but I wanted to. So my first interview, I've only told, this is only the second person I've told, and it was like a week ago.
Well, don't worry, Kevin, it's just me and you. No one else is listening.
Yeah. So I remember I went into the bathroom and I actually threw up before my interview.
That's hard.
Because I'm 42 years old. I've never interviewed in my life. I said, I feel like I had a successful Air Force career, right? I think I made a difference. I felt like I earned my 20 years in. And certainly, I mean, I had my retirement. It was going to come in. My wife, is a teacher. So I knew we'd be okay. I only had one child. He had the GI Bill. But I'm like, so what if I don't get hired? I said, well, the last 20 years meant just because I happened to join ROTC, I came to the Air Force, I was able to follow the playbook. Yeah. Right? What really mean was I think in my mind, I was a successful commander. I look back at it, like, I really felt like if I don't get a job, maybe I didn't actually earn any of that. Right. And so I put a lot of that on me. I'm kind of sharing this right now.
Serious imposter syndrome.
Right. I mean, I can't imagine like just throwing that 20 years out. And so it wasn't about, some people need it because that's how their family's going to eat, which is a lot of pressure. But, the good news, I said, you know what, I know I can do it. And I got up there and I guess I did well enough. Right. And I was assertive and got brought back and, got hired. But again, I point that out because people look at my transition, think that I had it all wired tight. Certainly I planned it, like a good maintenance person to do. But man, I had those moments where it was really, I was like, I remember I went to it won't take it too long, but I went to a job fair, which I highly recommend against.
Yep.
Unless you want to go be a police officer, a firefighter, a security guard, or go back to school.
Yep.
Then go to job fair. If you go there, so I'm going to practice my 30-second elevator pitch. That's fine, right? I remember I went to a job fair. I came home, I told I said, I think I'm just going to stay retired, take care of Junior and the dog. It was so frustrating, right? So you have to go in very low expectations of that, but really, you have to really understand it's going to be hard and really prepare, because again, I'm glad I did the preparation, because when I got in the interview, that kind of that muscle memory of like, I said what the mission statement of the company was. I had to learn the industry, had no idea what the industry is about, had to learn the dialogue, and had to make sure I had to demilitarize what I want to say, because I didn't want to, and I actually got feedback in my interview, right? They said you did really, really well. They said, but you were a little assertive, right? Because they said, take them through a process improvement. Remember I said I was black belt, and I stepped them through, and it was a PML, which since it's most mid, I can use the term PML on there, and how I done the process improvement and what the improvement was. And I got up there on the whiteboard and I did it. And they said, but you were very much protected your voice, which I thought was strange. Cause I'm like, well, geez, we were all trained to protect our voice.
I was
right?
talking to a crowd.
I was talking to a
we
crowd.
all have hearing problems.
We all have hearing problems. And half of them don't want to listen to me anyways. The other half want to go home because they've been on shift. Right. And we want to go work on the jets right away. So, and you got and the other AMUs got their jets ready. Damn it, man! I want to get out there too. So, but the thing is, so I took that feedback, right? Because they said, "Are you okay with feedback?" I took the feedback, and so the next one I kind of toned it down. But really understanding your audience, I'm like, okay, it's a different audience. I need to make sure to even tweak it a little more, not be overly loud, right?
Yep.
Still take responsibility and explain what I'm doing, but don't command or project on them.
So I agree. And I'm not trying to story top, but every job I've ever got an interview for, I've gotten a job offer for.
So you've done more for me, so you have a higher percentage of hit rate. Well, not percentage, you have more wins than me.
Yeah.
Percentage, I'm not 100%, you're 100%, but
yeah,
you've done it multiple
like
times.
6 times.
Yeah.
But I am just as fragile when it comes to the automated application systems. I have hurled applications and resumes at military industrial complex companies right after my retirement, trying to find anything that'll pay the bills. And I never got a human being to look at them. But as soon as I got a human being to interview me, I've gotten a job.
And I think that's where veterans really stand. I think I do feel strong. A lot of veterans, if you can connect with that human being, because I will tell you, veterans think that companies are setting aside positions. That's actually incorrect, right? When they say veterans friendly, means they want to hire veterans, doesn't mean set aside position. But in general, they may not understand the culture and what we totally bring, but they genuinely would like to hire a veteran, but that's not enough. You have to make sure and that's on you. We haven't talked that, but that's on you as the veteran. Don't expect them to hire you because you're a veteran.
Yeah.
Take their desire to want to give you an opportunity and do them right by being very much prepared for that interview, and that will help your transition. So I think that that's very important for people to understand that.
So I want to talk LinkedIn real quick, and then we could maybe go back to that. So the thing about LinkedIn, here's what I'll say, and I probably don't use it as much as I should. I check it maybe once a day, for certain once every other day I'm on LinkedIn. But like, it's not enough to just make a LinkedIn, put your picture up there, plug in a few things, and it's not a fire and forget thing. Very much like what you talked about at the very beginning of the podcast, Kevin. You know, your mentor was like, connect with one person a day. I don't do that. I probably should. I think I'm coming up on 500, which 500 is like the magic number. If you're 500, if you're sub 500, it shows the exact amount of connections you have, right, and then you are graded by that number. And then once you get over 500, it just says 500 plus, which could mean 501 or 5 billion.
I think I'm just under 2,000 at this point.
Right. Yeah, I'm like at 460 or something like that. But, you know, in order to grow your LinkedIn, part of what you need to do is comment on your connections.
Yes.
Provide insight. Disagree in such a way that you don't, you know, solicit an emotional response from yourself or the person you're disagreeing with. Post original sort of articles and commentary on whatever it is. Much of what I do with you, when I'm about to post something that I think is really interesting for you or your network, I send you a message. Hey, Kevin, I'm about to publish something I'd be interested in. If you read it and share it, let me know if you get any feedback or anything like that. That's how you grow an organic network, because the reality is LinkedIn is just a microcosm of what your actual social sort of outside LinkedIn network is. If I don't interact with somebody, if I reach back to my first supervisor from 1998 and go, hey, John Day, do you think you'd give me a job? He's like, I don't remember you. I don't know you. I don't know what you've done for the last 22 years. And you haven't talked to me in 22 years. No, I'm not going to get you a job. I don't know anything about you. But if I stayed in contact with him every day or every other day and talked and interacted, he would be able to see me. You know, he'd be able to vouch for me. He'd know. So like the simple do's and don'ts of LinkedIn, and obviously I have to say this because if you listen to 85% of these podcasts, you'll see why I have to say this. No profanity on LinkedIn. Maybe an S-bomb or something every once in a while is not the end of the world, depending on how you use it. But it's a workplace vocabulary, not a flight line vocabulary, a professional workplace sort of vocabulary.
Private sector workplace environment.
No religion. Like, I don't engage in religious conversations on LinkedIn, just like I don't typically engage in a religious conversation at work, unless it's me and a friend in the smoke pit having a heart-to-heart talking about something going on. I'm not talking religion at work. No politics either, because reality is 50% of the country is in one camp, the other 50% is in another camp. And I'm not even going to label the camps for this podcast either.
Right.
That's how much I'm going to stay away from it, right? And as soon as you pick a side, and I know this sounds really weird because I'm a really opinionated person, but as soon as you pick a side, you just alienated all the hiring managers from the other camp.
Right. And that's very, it's very important, right? Because I think that, my undergrad was political science, and I've certainly, mellowed on that. And I did that because I had really a passion for it. But on LinkedIn, the goal is to build connections. And for me, the goal is to help veterans. And if I alienate half the people, then then I've not helped veterans. It reduces my ability, or if I've offended veterans who may be a great fit for the company, right? So, I do go on there and comment. I completely agree with you on, it should be professional. It should be, add content. You can certainly, I would love if I've written something about, hey, translating, here's how you translate skill sets from the military private sector. I have no issue if someone says, I disagree with you.
Yep.
And here's why. I think that's great. And I think that's perfectly appropriate, right? And because it makes me think about my opinions and what I'm projecting and why it's perfectly acceptable on LinkedIn to have a disagreement. And I use LinkedIn to still educate myself on privacy. Like I go read articles about, MBOs and compensation, because I feel that I'm still a little bit behind my peers because maybe they've had 30 years in the private sector. I don't feel behind on people, like leadership of people and quality and things of that nature, but I certainly feel behind on like some basic corporate things. So I use LinkedIn. So I'll read people's articles, right? Well, here's what they say about MBOs. Here's how they view inclusion and diversity. Here's how they view, giving out food, right? These are all things that we should, that can be very important, that it's educating ourselves and add to that conversation. Now, I would definitely add a few don'ts. Like I think you should have your not a military uniform, right? As much as being a veteran is part of it, you should have a professional. Now mine, I don't have a tie on, and mine certainly is professional, and I have a backdrop, right? And I think that's that's important, right? On my backdrop on LinkedIn, I have something portrayed on my backdrop on Facebook is a cake. I think it was actually from my retirement service. That worked, right? I love cake. So you have to very much think who your audience is on and who you're trying to relate to and who you're trying to connect with, and make it professional. I do updates, like when I go speak at something, I add that, right? If and that's just not veteran. Like I've spoke at the California Department of Rehab about, I've hired people onto my team on inclusion diversity with disabilities, like severe disabilities. I've hired, and I spoke to the California Department of Rehab about our hiring efforts at my company. I put that on there right now. So why I'm at one is to keep LinkedIn fresh, but it's also to say that, hey, I'm veterans hiring is important to me, but that's not the only thing important to me. I also want to hire and have a workplace that hires people with disabilities, right? Because I think that's really, really important. So use that to, I guess I'll use the term brand. It still feels a little dirty for me to say that term, right? After 7 years, right? Same as networking, but to build a brand, I want people to say, yeah, he's a veteran, but he's also an executive in healthcare. He's an advocate for people, whether that person's a veteran, a young person out of college, someone with a disability, right? Because that's my brand, being about people and people development and leading people, and nurture your LinkedIn, and don't feel like you can't add to the discussion. So I'm glad you brought that up about add, because if you just go look and connect. Now I will tell you, I'm open to veterans connecting to me and saying, can you help me? That's me. I'm okay. I will tell you what and people are always trying to sell me stuff on LinkedIn, because given my position in company, I get that's how it works. And I don't get mad by that, right? But the one time I got mad is a veteran reached out to me, right? And most veterans are sales too. So that doesn't, He said, I want to talk to you about some veterans work you're doing in SoCal. It's a great, that's, I go speak, I mean, pre-COVID, I would speak, once a month out in the community doing something. It's a great, let's get on the call, talk. And he didn't ask anything about veterans advocacy. He wanted to sell me something.
Oh, that's dirty.
And I'm pretty calm, but I won't swear because we want this to go on LinkedIn. Right? I was very disturbed. Right. And that was that. And he reached out to me and I deleted him. Right. So if you want to go to a veteran to sell them something, say that's what you're trying to do. Do not try to hook them, especially don't hook someone on their passion. I'm like, this is great. He wants to talk about veterans, something that I care deeply about, and then he wants to sell me something. I was mad, right?
He was basically like the LinkedIn version of the VA home refinance mail that we all get.
Right.
Like, that's exactly. I was document enclosed. Oh, I could save $3,000 a year on my VA finance mortgage. Great. I'm never going to shop with you, people that sent me this mail ever.
And the only other thing I ever did is someone, so as part of my, I went through, my company put me through an executive development plan, and part of that was going to Stanford, which was a great experience. I really appreciate my company put me through that. And I learned a lot. I really think it's still up to me to learn about kind of growing in this. So I didn't put I'm a Stanford grad, right? That would be a little bit too much, right? But it's in there because I went, just like I put my PME in the Air Force. So I put that I went there and I put what it was about. And so someone reached out to me and said, I like to connect with people from elite universities and keep our group small and all that. And you should really proud. And I said, that was the other thing, because I went to a very regular university. I'm very proud. I think my education both at Long Beach State and Embry-Riddle, which people make fun of, but I very much feel my MBA at Embry-Riddle has helped me today. It's what you put into it.
Yeah.
Embry-Riddle is what you put into it. And I said,
they're not a sponsor of the podcast.
They're not a sponsor of the podcast.
Although I think Kevin came up with a new motto for Embry-Riddle. Embry-Riddle, it's what you put into it.
It's what is all education that way? Yes. Yes. That may be a good motto for them, but
I don't think it is a good motto.
No. So I guess I appreciate what I learned there. I guess I had some good professors. I appreciate what I learned from them. So it is a bit of a shout out to them. But I said to this guy, I said, where I went through executive education, I said, I'm much prouder of the 20 years I served my company or my country from my Cal State Long Beach degree. I said, and by the way, that Long Beach State degree helped me get where I'm here today. Yeah. That helped me go to Stanford for the executive. So, again, I think that's very important. So if you're a veteran reaching out, not name dropping where I went to school, be honest. I'm reaching out to you as a veteran, as another veteran. I want to network. I would now, if they're non-veteran, I would say I'm reaching out to you for a job.
Yep.
That I'm saying in the veteran community, be very clear. They may not respond, don't be offended, but they may like to say, I don't have anything right now, or I do have something right now, or let's talk. I've done that regularly. I'll get on the phone. Usually I'm driving home, right? Because I got nothing else to do driving home. And I'll say, hey, let's talk. And I'll give you some advice and we can talk about these kind of things. And I'm always happy to help other veterans. And there's plenty of other veterans. Some don't judge them, right? I just because I think veterans, if they don't have to, they're not obligated. But if you go in there's definitely veterans who'll talk to you and find those, but you still can't expect them to give you a job. I'm not going to give a job to someone, a veteran, on a job I don't have. I have budgets to make. It's important to have the right skill set and fit, and you may not be the right person. Doesn't mean you're not the right person for somewhere. You may not be the right person for my team.
And when it goes to like LinkedIn engagement, the more engaged you are, the better the recommendation will be in the future. If I'm a stranger or if I'm a listener to this podcast and I connect with Kevin here on LinkedIn and I send him a message going, hey, I listened to your podcast with Chris on 20 Years Done. Thank you for all the advice on transition. You know, thank you for your service, and I never talk to him again. And maybe I like a post here and there. I mean, Kevin, you already said you have 2,300, 2,400 connections. You see a lot of people activity on LinkedIn.
Right.
At that point, it's going to be, you're not going to pick one like out from 2,400 other engagements or whatever you're going to see. And, it's a year out from my separation. And then I go to separate, and I'm now trying to lean on my LinkedIn network. That's Kevin. Hey, Kevin, do you have any jobs or anything you can recommend me for? You might go, yeah, well, we have a veteran team to get your resume, whatever. But he has that, me as the character here, I have not built up any sort of currency, any sort of exchange of value between you and I in our relationship. So that way, when I go to tap that network, you're going to do a very cursory sort of handoff without a whole lot of depth to it, because I didn't engage and build that depth.
That's important, because you talked about the currency. So someone just says, they said, I heard your podcast and here's what resonated. That's a little more. And if I say, oh, I would respond saying, that's great. What were you aircraft maintenance, or what service? Because that's that bond, right?
Sure.
I was in the Army. Great. Someone like what we're talking now, service independent, right? Like I said, got more Army and Navy hired than Air Force. So this is not aircraft maintenance, Air Force specific. So, but if someone says, this is what I thought, and then what I'd say is, hey, I have some articles I've written. They're kind of simple, but they really would help veterans. Especially take a look at them, because that I want to put some of it is, I'm not testing, but part of it I am like, you may want my help. Take the time to read those, right? Not because it's an ego boost, but it's I wrote those.
You've already distilled a bunch of what you would say. Yeah.
Right. So then you can go through and say, wow, okay, now instead of maybe 80 questions, now I have 5. Now you can really understand. And that's that dialogue, right? And do that. And, something that, like I post when I do DoD Skill Bridge, right? If someone ever said, hey, can you tell me a little more about that? I can get them directed in, right? I mean, it's that LinkedIn is a conversation, and you're trying to go see who's paying attention to what they're interested in, because, ultimately you're the one that wants a job. You have to be more invested in that. And again, it's not stroking the person's ego. It's like, it's not that, but you have to do the work and see what's going on. And like, if a veteran comes to me now and say, are you familiar with DoD Skill Bridge? If they're on active duty, if they've already transitioned out, fine. I'd say, hey, here's Skill Bridge, go look at it, right? And I could tell them where like on Skill Bridge, the private sector is great. The limitation of Skill Bridge, I believe, is on the DoD side and commander specific. I may write an article on that. And you can see my giving a gunshot to say, plead with, I guess fellow commanders, say, if you get someone who has a chance at Skill Bridge, you need to let them do it, because you're denying someone what would be an awesome opportunity that
and they're
you
leaving
would want.
anyway. They're leaving anyways.
And guess what? If you give someone, yeah, I mean, and I tell you, like, and here's the other thing is, I'm a true believer, the more veterans, especially in companies are veterans, my team knows, my organization, our senior level leaders know about our Skill Bridge program. These people who are, one's still on active duty, one's already have transitioned to permanent, one's coming in, they're going to be interacting. And guess what? People on my team are saying, yeah, we know you're a veteran, but they don't see me so much now, even though I talk about these people are still on active duty. I'm like, don't call her an ex-Marine. I said, she's a Marine. I said, and she's still actually on active duty, right? And that, think about how she's going to advocate for the Marine Corps.
Yep.
Right. I will tell you, regardless of her experience, right? She's going to say the Marine let me come here. And the person who brought me on the team, Kevin, is a veteran. Guess how many positive things she's going to say about the DoD?
Yep.
A lot.
And right? I'll go one step further, and you let me know if we need to edit this out, because I don't know if it's okay or not. But commanders that engage in Skill Bridge in good faith, they're building relationship with companies at the same time. And when it comes time for them to transition out, they might already have a network pre-built from all their great candidates they sent in Skill Bridge for this place to this place to this place. It's almost a chance for a commander to create a professional network
and they
of
should
his
do that.
own.
I would say they should, because when you're you own your transition,
Mhm.
right? So I would say commanders should never take a position for their own person, right? But they should build that network. If someone said to me, hey, 3 years ago, and I don't care if they work for me, say, hey, I transitioned to someone from SkillBridge and, at Google, right? And they really learn, I'm really interested in healthcare. Can you help me on SkillBridge? I'd say, absolutely. That is that. I'd say, and I'd tell them, because they helped someone get into SkillBridge, I'll tell you what, Chris, I would be more inclined to try to help them because they took a hit. Their unit took a hit to do what was right by that person. And by the way, it's also great PR for the service, right?
Mm-hmm.
We spend a lot of money on air shows, which I agree with you on air shows. So I'm not going to go in there about air shows, right? About especially weekend air shows and things of that nature. But those kind of positive interactions are very, very important. I absolutely would help. So yeah, if a commander, even from a selfish perspective, like I'm definitely going to try to help you because you help one of your people and that would be great. Right. So yeah, that is building your network because people that will resonate. And my guess is if the people involved in the private sector with SkillBridge, let me tell you what, it's a lot more veterans in our SkillBridge program. The main SkillBridge supporters are all veterans who are in senior leadership roles. So you're talking.
They'll remember the commanders that sent them people.
They will. That is because I mean, some of them who are involved in our SkillBridge are enlisted. They weren't commanders. They were senior. But they were senior enlisted, right? They will bend over backwards. You guarantee if a commander said, I send something, I will bend over backwards to get the resume saying, I appreciate what you did. Now I'm going to go on the offensive to help you out because you did that, right? I still can't guarantee you. So yeah, I really view it as that way. You're right that's something that guess what? Everyone will transition eventually.
You're
going to do it. I don't care whether you're an E4 or an O10. And having people out there advocating for you is very important in building that goodwill and building your brand. I'd love and I'm not seeing it. I would love for commanders to say, I sent one of my staff sergeants to this company in SkillBridge. I wish them success. And I hope they'll come back and tell my unit about it. Like I'm waiting to see that. Right? I see a lot of the private sector posting about how much they like SkillBridge, right? I'm not seeing the same enthusiasm yet in the military side, and I need to see more over there.
I actually am impressed that any commanders let anybody go. Like, it's not easy.
It's not.
I appreciate it. I'm really surprised because I've seen a lot of SkillBridges approved, and that's like a big leap. And I don't know if there was messaging from the DoD, like really pushing SkillBridge to do it. But I think commanders are doing a lot better than I thought they would do.
Yeah, so I mean, there's the deal. I mean, it's commander's responsibility, right? I was on your commander panel. We talked about that. The commanders have that role, but I would like to see more. I actually think that the limiting factor would be on the DoD side, the private sector, and private sector. The DoD is still paying their salary and all that. So of course there's an incentive for the private sector, but they still have to interview and train them and all that. So we're putting time and energy into it also. But yeah, I very much appreciate the commanders. I think that DoD SkillBridge, yes, it'd be great if after they finish, you've had previous guests on talk about it'd be great if everyone had 6 months that they would automatically go into SkillBridge or something out about that. But I absolutely think that SkillBridge is great. I think is anyone who puts down SkillBridge, like it's significantly better than zero, right? And you've talked about changing culture. SkillBridge, in my opinion, is a legitimate attempt to help the transition. Legit. There is no downside. It is taken away from military readiness to help the young men, and not always young, the men and women transition out of the military in the private sector, and it creates such positive buzz. So, I really do think that it's a cultural shift we need to kind of again, I'll use another buzzword lead into. You've got me use like 3 buzzwords, so I'm a little disappointed today. But
I feel like we have really good synergy.
end-to-end synergy. The process is so no, it's we joke a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. I think that you kind of talk about your advocacy. I know you haven't talked much about SkillBridge, but I would say there's people like you who've advocated for change, and SkillBridge, in my mind, is a huge leap forward that the DoD should be legitimately proud of.
Yeah, I agree.
Time and energy into it. There's nothing they shouldn't be proud of it on that.
Yeah, I think I have no complaints about the SkillBridge. It's probably one of the best programs I've seen the DoD implement. It's very selfless on behalf of the DoD, which is so refreshing, honestly.
Yeah, and it creates. I mean, I can't say how much of a positive impact I think it has on the team, my team, for the people joining, because it just, I mean, I can tell you the Marine Corps is getting a lot of good press by one of my recent, we don't call it an internship, we call it a fellowship now, because intern people associate with people in college where This is not the case.
I feel very awkward at 42 talking about my internships. I'm not
right. Yes, it is a little, if people goes, he's a little bit slow.
Yeah.
I'll say slow. Right. so yeah, really. It really creates a great thing. So I'm really proud of that. And I really do believe like the Marine Corps is getting a lot of positive, because people, the military is not understood by a lot of people. Again, hence the talk. This is very much, we've not gone off topic, by the way. This is very much on the transitioning that helping people understand those services, because, and by the way, I had the hiring manager for this person listen to some of your podcasts and to help educate. And I warned her about the language, and she did agree with me. And I told her that's actually not very bad compared to some of his other stuff. But we talk about that military civilian divide. Again, this is still very much on topic about transition, that educating people about that transition. Again, in many places, you're not going to have those veterans. So you are going to have to talk to them so they understand that, and understanding that, and understanding like SkillBridge, all these things opens up your chance to get jobs. You know that there's a SkillBridge you can apply. Look at it that way, right? So definitely you need to understand that as part of, your transition.
Yep. Okay. Well, we went long today. I should say tonight, because we talked till almost midnight my time.
Which, since I'm almost 50, 8:43 my time is like 3 a.m, right? Because that's probably the time I'll be up tomorrow, because I am getting old and you can't. So yeah, we did go long, and but yeah, really, I appreciate you having me on. This is, like you really are advocating around suicides. And I would say the culture, right, is really where you're advocating. And I think veterans are trying to do everything can't, right? Because it's like you can't, but my passion is truly helping veterans transition and finding meaningful opportunities. So I'm not surprised, Alon, because this combines two really, I love to talk about the other topics, PT. I mean, those were the smoke pit discussions, which we'll remember when we're 90 or we'll forget, right? But
no, we have a podcast.
I guess we won't forget, right? We'll say we look a lot younger, right? But this is something that's really passionate. And this, I think, hits every veteran, regardless of service. We all have to do it. So I know Alon, but again, I view this as it's an hour and a half, 40 minutes of education. I really hope this helps people. I'm happy to help people on LinkedIn because this is my advocacy. It's like I mentioned, I've branched beyond just helping veterans. It's helping people who have trouble getting jobs anyways. I think that's where I've gone now, but veterans will always remain my kind of my main calling, because I think that's where I can add value and credibility. And I can speak to veterans, understand their language. And I've been in the private sector long enough. I can speak the language of the private sector. So I view that as my goal. So again, I appreciate you having me on for this, despite me, I guess, paying to have myself on for veterans. I'm glad I can still make you laugh at almost midnight, right? But
the
yeah, I
bar
think
to
that
make
that's
me laugh at midnight is much lower than
pretty
9
low.
o'clock.
Yeah, it's pretty low. But yeah, I really view this as important to do. So thank you for having me on, Chris, and for all the things you do.
Yeah. So what I'll say is, final reminder: if anybody's listening, you're transitioning or you want to get your LinkedIn spun up, you're certainly welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn, Chris McGee. LinkedIn's a little bit weird when it comes to finding people because it's like connections to connections. It's kind of hard to get started. But the best thing to do is either go by region, company, or prior employer. You can find me. If you connect with me, then you can go through my connections and find Kevin or vice versa. But you're certainly welcome to connect with both of us. If you want to drop a note saying, who you are or how you found us, that's fine. But anything quick will work. And then stay engaged and, stay away from the stuff that you wouldn't talk about in a professional environment, and engage on LinkedIn. So that way, when you're going to separate, you're going to transition, you have a network that you can use, and it has some depth to it, is what I'll say. Other than that, Kevin, do you have anything else?
No, thank you for having me on. And again, just like Chris, happy to connect. The best way to find, I think, Kevin Traw, there's no others. I didn't say I'm unique, right? But there's not going to find, if you put Kevin Traw, U.S. Air Force, it'll definitely pop up, and it'll be there. And I think I still pretty much look like I look now. So you'll be able to find me, and we'll start the dialogue from there.
And just one final thing, like if you go back to previous episodes, you look at the episode I did with Mike McDowell, which is episode, oh man, I'm going to edit this out for sure. I always say that.
And you always talk about how you have your episode list up now. You're so proud of that.
I know, but I didn't know I was going to bring this up. Oh shit, where the hell? There he is, Mike McDowell. If you look at episode 26 of Mike McDowell, I saw him in Vegas once give a presentation. I LinkedIn connected with him in that moment, and then I just stayed engaged. And then when the podcast was rolling, I thought he would probably be a great person to have on here to talk about his research in veteran transition. I reached out over LinkedIn. He didn't really remember who I was. And then I kind of reminded him, we kind of chatted briefly. I actually was a participant for his dissertation for his study. I gave data, and then we talked there, and he's like, yeah, I'd love to do your podcast. And we've stayed engaged ever since. So like those connections on LinkedIn, there is much like Embry-Riddle. It's what you make of it, right? It's how much you stay engaged and how much you use them. That's what matters.
And I've connected with Mike. I asked him for some data. He sent me his dissertation to read. He went on a podcast recently. I listened to that also. You kind of, again, we're at the end. We don't want to wrap back around, but that's definitely, you talk about those connections, about there's someone you met one time who now I've connected with, and I've actually talked to him on the phone about what he's doing in San Antonio, right? This is how it works in the private sector, is networking, getting to understand, making meaningful connections, and helping each other out, veteran or otherwise, to learn what's going on.
Yep. Okay. Well, thanks, Kevin. I appreciate your time. And until next time, either you're on the podcast or you're running around listening to me talking to somebody else. But until then, adios.